Do Russians actually buy the reported 87 victory for Putin? And if not, why no revolt? Whether they actually buy it or not, they don't revolt because they are scared. The Kremlin has created a police state based on fear and domination, and any dissent makes you a target. You can think the government is corrupt without wanting to risk your life in a revolt. In the West, it's pretty clear that the interest of business and their pet misinformation networks massively affect elections and government, but that doesn't mean I'm going to die for the cause. Why no revolt? Because people care about their lives, the lives of their loved ones, having jobs to support themselves and their family, having a place to live, etc. People have to be very, very desperate and have very little to lose to revolt against a violent dictatorship, and most Russians are not that desperate. As a Russian person, we all know he's awful, but no one can stand up to him because they will surely be sent to prison, and I assume you don't know how bad prison is in Russia. It's likely a death sentence or you'll wish you were dead. What do you think we could do? There's nothing to be done. He's rich and powerful and could easily harm those who get in his way. I mean, they didn't overthrow the Soviets. Koreans don't overthrow Kim. It's harder than you would think to convince a population to die for their freedom. Do Russians actually buy the reported 87 victory for Putin? I think not. And if not, why no revolt? Vast majority supports him. 87 seems kinda fake, but I bet real number would be still over 60. I'm Russian myself, who luckily lives abroad at the moment, so can share an insight only through what I have seen when I lived there in Moscow and Voronezh. Most people in their 20s and 30s, at least those who I spent time with, were before the war either anti-Putin or just about okay with the situation. While older people 50 will be more pro-Putin because of how good life has been under him. They lived through the fall of USSR and the 90s, which was a terrible time to be alive. Many had to difficult things to survive while under Putin. Since then 90s life has gotten good, and most of them live better now than they have ever before. Hence they are happy with him. As for why no revolt, it's because of fear for you and loved ones. Imagine if you a typical Russian today. If you go protest tomorrow, you'll be beaten by police and thrown in jail for 30 days if lucky. If unlucky, you'll get 5 years in prison, or if very unlucky, sent to the front lines to die. People don't want to die. The days of romantically giving your life for a cause is slowly dying. 1917 was 2 revolutions. The first, the overall elite decided that the Tsar had to go. Then, about 8 months later, the Bolsheviks had their revolution, which led to the Russian Civil War that ended in a series of mass repressions, which, after a pause, then led into the Great Purge by Stalin. There were no revolts at that time, just lots of mass murder of potential political opponents, including almost all of the original revolutionary Bolshevik leaders. The collapse of the Soviet Union was kicked off by an attempted coup against the premier, Gorbachev, that failed. Yeltsin was at the time the president of Russia, and used that as a reason to dismantle the USSR and empower Russia as a separate entity, which he happened to lead. None of these are revolutions of people used to a long tradition of democracy. The Russian people aren't outraged at the rigged election because Putin has already been rigging elections a long time. They expect it. And by expecting it, it leads to a fatalistic shrug of course he rigged it, such is life. Rather than this tramples on hundreds of years of Russian democratic tradition. He kills those who challenge him. So, no revolt. Because, despite them having an advantage in numbers, they live in a country with a history of destroying people in the opposition. This causes them to live in a culture of fear. People have been arrested simply for placing flowers at the Navalny Memorial. People in this thread don't seem to realize that Putin actually has legitimate majority support in Russia, even if it's not 87. There were soldiers literally looking over their shoulders as they voted. Pretty sure they were aware of the consequences of not voting for the right candidate. When you run the play of Emperor Palpatine on your people, you get the result. America is ready to do it ourselves if we don't figure ourselves out by November. Why don't they just revolt? Are they stupid? Russians have very little memory or tradition of democracy. Having a strong leader in charge is just the way the world works from their perspective. Western media tells us most Russians are too afraid to openly revolt and secretly hate Putin, and the war in Ukraine is unpopular. But other media outlets seem to indicate his support as well, as support for the war is actually pretty strong, maybe not 87 strong, but certainly strong enough to win. My knee-jerk reaction is that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But not being Russian or in Russia, I really don't or can't know for sure. Feeling like you can't believe the government or the media pretty much sucks. People forget real quick what Russia was like before Putin came into power. Obviously the average Russian isn't this naive, but don't be fooled in thinking Putin doesn't have majority support. This is the best quality of life they have ever had. Russia doesn't have a history of democracy. Culturally, Russians have no expectation of fair elections. Yes, a lot of will buy, and even more would be glad lol. Putin faked some voices, it, so cool, real man anti-Putin minority is about 20, maybe 30 in the best case. They have no chances, no will, no power to revolt.